All right. So this evening, please everyone have a seat. Thank you. This evening we are honored to welcome the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, Pete Buttigieg. I actually had the honor of meeting the mayor in Iowa a couple of months ago, and I got to interview him on a live stream with one of my colleagues, and he was so incredible. Yeah. Pete Buttigieg is here tonight, like I said, to give our keynote. Mayor Buttigieg has spent the last 8 years serving as the mayor of South Bend, serving in his hometown, fighting for progressive change in the heart of the Midwest. With a new approach and innovative ideas, he helped turn a town once described by a national publication as dying into a growing city, creating good jobs and an opportunity for his community. From climate change to the rise of white nationalism, to exposing healthcare costs, to wages that don't keep up with soaring bills, Mayor Buttigieg is now running for president. Yeah. Because America needs a new approach to our politics to meet the crisis on our doorstep. As a veteran and a mayor, he knows what we can accomplish when we stand together, and that's what we're going to do in 2020. We are so honored to have him here tonight. Please help me give a warm Nevada welcome to Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
Thank you, and thanks to everyone here for the leadership, the activism, the leadership, the activism, the organization, the commitment to values that is reflected tonight. We need more of what is going right in Nevada from coast to coast in this country, and you are leading the way in so many ways. So, when I think about the motto, the words "battle born," it makes me think about my own city. I remember a moment where I was staring absent-mindedly into the city seal of the city of South Bend. It was one of those things you never really notice until you do. If you ever notice a city flag or a seal, I started really looking at it. It's got a rising sun, it's got puffy clouds, an American flag, and the word peace. And I got to wondering why that was the imagery. You didn't see machinery or the St. Joe River or even corn, which is what you might expect to see on a city seal in Indiana. But then the key to it was clear when I looked further down the seal and saw the number 1865 and realized that the city had been formally incorporated in that year, just a few weeks, it turns out, after Lee's surrender at Appomattox. And I remember thinking after I took note of that, what a hopeful act it must have been at a moment like that to draw up the paperwork and make our city official right at the end of that horrific conflict, right there in prairie land that back then counted as the West, at such a tender time in the life of our country. And what an act of hope I think it must have been here too, for the residents of what would become this state to come together, even as the rest of the Union was being ripped apart. I've been thinking a lot about the courage and the hopefulness that embodies at a time like this, because I think we're at a moment that is hard to read in American history, because we're on one of those blank pages that comes in between chapters. And it's going to fall to us to figure out how the next chapter is going to be different than the last one. And this, by the way, is something I was trying to convey at the last debate, if you happen to have a chance to tune into the presidential debate. So you saw that one of the images I want America to think about is what's going to happen the day after Donald Trump stops being president. Because one way or the other, this presidency is going to happen. So it's pleasant to think about. It's a relief to think about. This particular brand of chaos and corruption will come to an end. But really think about it. Think about the shape our country will be in that day. the sun comes up on a country even more polarized than we are now, with everything that we've been through and everything we're about to go through. And the challenges and the crises that brought us to this point haven't taken a vacation for the presidency or the impeachment process we're living through now. The sun is going to come up over a country rapidly approaching the point of no return when it comes to climate change. The sun's going to come up over an economy where millions of Americans can't get ahead, where millions more lack health care or cannot afford treatment even if they have coverage. An economy where we see what we have right now, where the Dow Jones is going up even as our lives get shorter. It shouldn't even be possible. The sun's going to come up over a nation beset by a gun violence epidemic that is stealing lives everywhere from the Strip that we mark again that tragedy after October 1 to day-to-day violence happening in communities around the country, including my own. And beyond those challenges, we're going to face something I can only describe as a crisis of belonging in the United States of America. A crisis that I think has fellow Americans wondering where they fit in and whether they belong at all. Because in 100 different ways, different people are being told they don't belong. And I believe this yearning for belonging is contributing to problems from our broken politics right now, to a rise in what are called deaths from despair, as people self-medicate in response. So I'm running to be president for that day after. A president who can gather up the pieces and put this nation back together. I'm running because I think America is running out of time. And we cannot wait any longer to change the trajectory of this country. I'm running because I think we need to undertake bold and big changes in order to meet the urgent crises that we face. But also, I insist that the best way to get it done, the only way to actually get it done, is to do it together. And my faith that that can be done, that we can bring people together, is rooted in where I'm from. So I grew up in the so-called Rust Belt in northern Indiana, passing collapsing car factories and empty houses on my way to school. I didn't even know it was unusual until I left for college to have empty factories around me. And politics for me has never been about who said what on cable or who looked good in a committee meeting. The North Star for me is how politics affects our everyday lives. I think that's how we as a people, we as a species, came to invent government and politics to begin with, is because of our everyday lives. And my North Star in politics is based on how what begins in those big white buildings in Washington, D.C. reaches into our paychecks and our workplaces and our homes and our families. People in my life have been killed by the opioid crisis and saved by the Affordable Care Act. My family's finances have been pressured by six-figure student debt, but also lifted up by the existence of Medicare during my father's final illness. And the course of my own life was changed forever by the orders that sent me into a foreign war. But also, my marriage, the most important thing in my life, exists by the grace of a single vote on the United States Supreme Court. That's why politics matters to me. Should be about our day-to-day lives, but it feels lately like it's more about the day-to-day drama among political figures on television. Who's up and who's down and who got off the best zinger in the debate. And we're sending people to Washington to fight for us, but when they get there, often it seems to become more about the part about fighting than the part about us. That's what I'm out to change. Especially those in charge right now, dividing us around the very values that are supposed to hold us as a country together. They talk about patriotism. Patriotism. I believe patriotism lies in speaking up for our beliefs. And there is nothing patriotic about telling those who dissent to go back to where they came from. I think love of country requires that we remember that the country is made of people. And you cannot love your country if you hate half of the people in it. And when I think about honoring the flag, I think less about hugging it, sometimes literally. I think about recognizing what it means, including the idea that when somebody blows the whistle on official misconduct, that is an act of loyalty to the Republic of Israel. That's what it means to me to honor the value of patriotism. They talk about faith. To me, faith in action is what's expressed by people like the activists I was with in Reno, who walked me through neighborhoods to help me understand the crisis of affordable housing there and what they were doing to help people with addiction. I'm not talking about the use of faith as a weapon to tell some people they don't belong. I'm promising that when I'm president, nobody will ever look at the White House and wonder whatever happened to the scripture that says, I was hungry and you fed me. I was a stranger and you welcomed me. Whatever you did to the least of these, you did to me. That's the kind of faith I'm talking about. And yes, we can honor that understanding of faith values and also honor the bedrock principle that in this country, the president is there for people of every religion and of no religion equally. Because that's They talk about family values. But to me, family values are what I saw on display when I was with UAW workers striking in order to make sure that their children would have a better life and that they could pay for them to have a good upbringing. That's family values too. And then there's freedom. The refrain of our friends on the right, freedom. But they talk about freedom like all there is to freedom is cutting regulations and taxes. I'm talking about a different freedom. I'm not talking about Amazon's freedom to not have to pay any federal income tax. To be fair, sometimes freedom does mean getting government out of the way. This, for example, is why the government ought to get out of the business of dictating to women what their reproductive health care should be. Asking the government to step up and make sure we have the freedom to, not just freedom from, freedom to live a life of our choosing. That's why we stand for things like the freedom to organize, whether you're a culinary worker or an And yes, that includes gig workers, because a gig is a job. If you're doing a job, you're a worker, and if you're a worker, you ought to be protected.
Yeah!
But as long as they're using those values to wedge us off against each other, we're going to get more divided. And we have seen that division manifest itself in the ugliest way. Whether it's an LGBTQ center vandalized with a homophobic slur, or images of hate spray painted on a black church right here in Vegas.
Yeah.
That's not right.
Nope. No.
That's not us.
Nope.
That wall on the border that the president talks about is never going to be better. But it's a good thing it's not. Don't even get me started on the alligators. That wall is a joke, but here's what's not. Very real walls and fences are going up in our communities, in our churches, in our families. I think a lot of us are bracing for Thanksgiving dinner coming up in a few weeks. That meal has turned into a minefield, right? Those walls are real. But here comes the good news, Nevada. You have a thumb on the scale when it comes to deciding our future. Because in a few months, you get to take one last look at that show that this president's going on, this reality show, or horror show, or game show, or I think a couple other words. You get to take one last look at that show, pick up the remote, and change the channel to something better. Donald Trump and everything he represents, but to start tackling the conditions that fueled his rise in the first place. Because under ordinary circumstances, a guy like that doesn't get within cheating distance of the Oval Office to begin with. So we know that we are not living under ordinary circumstances. Which, by the way, is why we can't act like this president is an aberration, an anomaly, that we can just go back to normal. Nor can we water down our values or paper over our differences. Nor will it happen if we get so trapped in trying to outdo each other on a debate stage that our policies exclude more people than they include before we get to November. Here's how we win. From John F. Kennedy to Barack Obama, we win when we offer leadership from a new generation with new ideas, calling on America to be better than it's been. And that's where I come. That's what I'm offering in this room. Now, they're going to run the same playbook no matter what. So, if I'm your nominee, he's going to say socialism this, socialism that. But if I'm your nominee, he'll be saying it about somebody who brought opportunity and jobs to a community where the economy had been in decline. Worked with the private sector to make sure that it happened and that it benefited workers. He'll do his usual thing about how we're the party of Washington. He'll talk about the swamp, although I can't help but notice that swamp got an awful lot swampier on this president's swamp. See, when I'm your nominee, he'll try to say that, but I'm somebody who doesn't go to work in Washington. I work on the ground every day, guiding a city toward a brighter future, right in the heart of the country. And of course, he'll talk tough and maybe throw himself a military parade, but when I'm your nominee, he'll have to debate an American war veteran on who would make a better commander-in-chief. Debate about why a commander-in-chief who cares about America and American leadership would never, ever betray allies who helped on the battlefield. So I'm ready for this president. And forget the other one, I'm ready for that too. But look, with the unprecedented nature, a couple folks got what I was thinking. I'm just here to give you something better to know Indiana by than But look, it's not about this president, because the more we're talking about him, the less we're talking about us, about you. And we've got to get back to a White House that puts our everyday lives first. That's what I'm asking you to picture. A president who gets out of bed in the morning thinking not about who hurt his feelings on cable or whether Chrissy Teigen was mean to him on Twitter, but how big your life. And wouldn't it be nice to turn on the news and when the subject turns to the White House, feel your blood pressure go down a little bit? Presidency delivering solutions that are big enough and bold enough to meet our challenges, but also big-hearted enough to rally the American people together to get it done. So when I am your president, I will deliver affordable, universal health care with Medicare for all who want it, and let Americans have the choice to walk away from a private plan if and only if it isn't serving them well, and trust you to decide for yourself. Instead of tax cuts for the wealthiest, we're going to lift wages and empower workers and invest in rural economies that have been overlooked for far too long. The biggest problem with our economy is not that the wealthy are being taxed too much, it's that Americans aren't being paid enough. We're going to fix that when I'm president. And yes, we have a president right now who cannot summon the courage even to pass universal background checks supported by more than 90% of Americans. I will be a president who understands that the kinds of weaponry that I carried in Afghanistan have no business being sold for profit anywhere near American schools or neighborhoods. When I'm president, we will tackle systemic racism with a Douglas plan for Black America to ensure that race is no predictor of anyone's health or wealth or relationship with law enforcement in the United States of America. We're going to change our immigration laws and protect those who are here on TPS because of what they fled in their home countries, recognizing that this is not a favor to them, but a benefit to the United States, because anybody who has come to this nation is bearing a gift that we ought to honor. And we can manage our border in a way that matches our laws and our values, and we'll be safe. To help build up the same sense of solidarity I got in the military, we're going to create more service opportunities. Because people who got in my vehicle when we went outside the wire, they didn't care if I was going home to a boyfriend or a girlfriend. They didn't care what country my dad immigrated from, or if I was a Democrat or a Republican. They just wanted to know I could do the job. And we came from completely different places in life. Different backgrounds, different races, different politics for sure. We trust each other with our lives. We're going to give every American that opportunity to get to know their fellow Americans without having to go to war in order to get there. That's why we want to create 1 million paid voluntary national service opportunities in this country. We're also going to get a president who understands that personnel is policy, that it matters who you appoint. We can look forward to a cabinet that reflects the diversity of America, including one that is at least 50% women. In that cabinet, you will have an attorney general who understands that she or he works for the American people, not the American president. You can expect to have an environmental protection who actually believes in climate science. How about a Secretary of the Interior who believes in protecting public lands? And if we have any educators in this, help is on the way. Because when I am president, you can expect a Secretary of Education who actually believes in public education. This is what the office is about. The purpose of the presidency is not the glorification of the president. It's the unification and empowerment of the American people. That unwritten part of the job, the moral leadership in this office, whose importance I'm not sure we fully understood until it was gone, is what can create that sense of belonging where people only feel isolation today. I want to share with you one of the best moments in this whole campaign. Happened in a backyard in Iowa. A teenager came up to me named Bridget to tell me what the campaign meant to her. She said, I feel like I can be myself now. I feel like I can go to school and talk about my values and not be ashamed. And I thought I knew what she was starting to tell me, because I've been so moved by people who let me know that sharing my truth has made it easier for them to do the same. But she was saying something I hadn't quite caught. She went on. She said, I can go to school. I don't have to be ashamed. I can come forward. I don't have to be ashamed just because I have autism. And when she said that, I knew we were getting somewhere as a campaign. Because if a campaign could do that, months before the first vote is cast, could speak to her and let her know she fits. If a campaign could do that, imagine what the American presidency can do when it is in the right hands. Not just for our policy, but for the fabric of this nation. Wouldn't that be a beautiful thing?
Yeah.
So as much as hope has fallen out of fashion in American politics because of some of what we've been up against, I am motivated by a sense of hope that one day I'll be able to tell my future children what we did right now to give them a better world. That I'll have to tell them I'm sorry it got as bad as it got by 2019. But then I'll say, look at what we did next. Look at what we did in 2020 to set up an economy where a rising tide actually did lift all boats. Look at what we did to get ahead of climate change before it robbed them of their opportunities in life. I'll tell them our democracy was slipping away. But then we brought an end to gerrymandered districts and money in politics, and we even saw to it that the American presidency would go to the person who got the most votes. Once upon a time, as you can believe it, there was a day when kids learned active shooter drills before they learned to read, but then we came together as a country and summoned the courage to do something about it. I am looking forward to being able to have that conversation with my kids and with the children who show up at my events now, not yet old enough to vote, but with urgency in their eyes because they know how much they have on the line and the decisions we are making right now. Worried about issues they shouldn't have to worry about, because it is the responsibility of anybody old enough to vote to figure this stuff out so they don't have to, so that by the time they're running for office, they can work on a whole different set of issues for the American people. I'm looking forward to that. And running for office is an act of hope. Not naive hope, but the hope of those who aren't willing to go back, who can't afford to go back, who literally can't go back. And it's the hope of people who insist on something much greater than trying to be great again, because there is no again in the real world. Just the need to make sure the future is better than the past. That's what makes me tick. So are you ready to spread that sense of hope to everybody you know, to keep them involved and bring them to the table? Are you ready to bring a little common sense and common purpose to Washington? And not just Washington, but all of our state and local offices, because we will never again be caught making the mistake of treating the presidency like the only office in matters. And we're not looking forward to what we can do together that first day the sun comes up after the Donald Trump presidency. I'm pretty sure we're on the same page. I hope that I will earn your support, and I will see you early and often on the campaign trail. Thank you for everything that you do. Thank you for having me here tonight. Let's keep doing this together.
Please help me give a big thank you. All right. Well, the